Welcome back to the Movement Professional Podcast. I'm here again with Dr. Asare Christian of Aether Medicine. Welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Christian.
Thank you, Dr. Chris. It's good to be back. I'm excited and looking forward to this conversation. Yeah.
I am as well. And this hopefully will be the first of several conversations that we do based on some of the services you offer. And what I'd really like to get across is just, some things in the medical world that are a little bit new, because I know you offer some stuff that's not traditional, but it's very well studied and very researched. And I think that's what a lot of people, I know a lot of my clients need that. And so I think it'd just be great to I'll ask you some questions about some of the things that you offer. And today we're going to talk mostly about cellular medicine, which is a term I had never heard of until I met you. So I'm going to take a little bit of a deep dive into it today and get a sense of what that means, how that can help different people, how you offer it, how it's implemented, and maybe the future of it too. And I think that's going to be an important topic with all of these areas is not just what's happening now, but what might be happening in the future. Because I think a lot of stuff, there's research being done, and the future looks promising for some people. It might not, but I think like if we talk about like what's down the pipeline, like it could actually make healthcare have a little bit more optimism with healthcare.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for this opportunity to come back and talk about some of the things that we can actually do to change health.
Mm.
Because one of the problems we have in healthcare, and as you understand, is like there's so much science. The science is so advanced, and our understanding of cellular molecular mechanisms of a lot of disease states, a lot of health issues is clear. The issue becomes, it takes many, many years to translate that science into conventional practices, right? So even if we know that a certain type of medicine works or a certain type of molecule can help improve people's health, it would take 20 years to go through research and do all of those things. So I think we are also in an era with technology and AI where everything we're cranking out research and our understanding is so expanding. And we don't have to wait this long to really try to bring some of this knowledge to translate to health. So what I'm doing is, I think we've talked about this, where I'm really interested in, going to these places, learning about the science, the new science, which is validated. There's safety behind some of this specific treatment. And how can we bring that to the individual who may need it instead of waiting to FDA approve it or to have any of those things done. So I think education and knowledge is powerful. And so I feel very honored to be able to be in a space where, like you said, I'm learning cellular medicine. This is actually something I learned in medical school.
Right.
But when I finished medical school, I just became very focused on treating symptoms. I block signals and I take medications and not thinking about the cell. So
Right.
this is an interesting thing to be able to get to and get to the root cause of problems. So I think that's where the cellular medicine fits in very well.
Beautiful. Why don't we start with, defining cellular medicine, from your perspective? What does it mean? How do you implement it?
Yeah, so a good way to kind of think of cellular medicine is, our bodies are made out of trillions of cells, right? And the cells has all this intelligence to do what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to carry out specific tasks, makes energy, take care of waste, modulate inflammation, modulate all of these processes. There's multiple things that are going on in your body. And the cell has this intelligence to do that so well. And as we age, as we get exposure to disease, as toxins or injuries happen, the cells have to figure out how to repair itself, and it has that potential. But as disease become overwhelm the cells start not making good choices. So then disease would develop, right? And a lot of times, even in a lot of the disease states that we have, diabetes, neurodegenerative diseases, it turns out that, majority of the cell, about 70% of the cell, if you're taking a specific system, 70% of that system has to not be working before it shows up as symptoms. So a lot of times we are actually kind of like behind. So cellular medicine is an approach of medicine where we are trying to restore the intelligence of the cell to adapt in a way that's healthy. When you put a lot of stress on a cell, it can either adapt to a healthy way or downgrade to not a healthy way. Okay. An example of that will be, for example, if you're somebody who's eating a lot of sugar and your body have to make insulin to put the sugar back into your body, because when sugar is floating around, it's not good for your vessels. It causes inflammation. There's all of this problems. So your body can make insulin to control that, to try to push it down. Eventually, when there's too much sugar, then that inflammation itself is going to affect the cells that are making insulin. And
Mm,
now your body cannot even make that insulin anymore. And it's just going to downgrade itself. Okay, I'm not going to push for insulin because if I try to make more insulin, I'm creating more waste. And then that's also affecting the beta cells, the cells that are making insulin. So the cells that are making insulin will now downgrade. So the
mm,
idea of a cellular medicine is to be able to understand all of these mechanisms, the molecular level, the physiology, and restore the cells to its own physiology so it can heal, it can do what it needs to do in a proper way. One of the things that we also know is as the cell becomes injured or becomes old, it has a couple of options. One, it can commit suicide where it will die apoptosis, where we expect it to just die by itself.
mm,
It can also go into a process called autophagy, where it can recycle itself to become good again, or it can become a zombie cell, or it can become senescence. And that actually happens as we age. So there's all of these things that can happen with the cell based on what type of exposure it's getting to, and it will adapt to a healthy way or a bad way based on the signal. So the whole idea, and again, kind of going in circles, but the idea is that cellular medicine is an approach where we actually try to signal the cell to make the right choice.
mm. So I remember learning about cells as basically like the basic
Yeah.
building block of human physiology, right? So, it sounds to me like this is sort of just the absolute common denominator of the human body is if we can kind of take things to the cell, like everything comes from there. So I think it sounds fascinating.
Yes, and that's the root cause. We talk about
You're
cause
right.
problems. So when you take a muscle, the basis of it is you have myocytes, you have specific cells that are doing specific function.
Mm,
Um, and at the basic unit of all of this functioning, me sitting here talking, I have to use muscles, I have to use neurotransmitters, I have to use energy to make all of that. And that's a function of a unit of the cell.
right.
And a good way to kind of, understand that is looking at the cell itself. You have the cell, it has a membrane around the cell that it can communicate or send signals out. And then you also have the mitochondria. So there's multiple things in the cell.
Hmm.
One of the big things in the cells that we try to target as a way to manage disease or improve health is looking at what's going on within the mitochondria as well as the nucleus of the cell. So the nucleus of the cell and the mitochondria communicate.
Right.
And as it turns out, mitochondria, which is one of the organelle in the cell, which we know as the energy of the cell, has all of these other functions. It actually modulates how we turn on autophagy or apoptosis, a programmed cell death. It stores calcium. It helps with immune modulation. Mitochondrial DNA can even create damage-associated molecular patterns. So it can
Mm,
modulate immune cells and even autoimmune disorders. So there's all of these communications that are going on within the mitochondria and the cell that if we figure out how to signal the mitochondria in a healthy way, we can get to health. And in fact, a lot of the disease that we have actually relates to mitochondrial disease. A lot of disease
mm,
is a function of the cell not having enough energy. And
right.
again, if the cell doesn't have enough energy, it's going to downgrade. So if in metabolic disease, diabetes, we've talked about that, obesity, all of that is a cell not having enough energy, getting overwhelmed, and then the mitochondria deciding to shift in a different way. So really understanding all the component of the cell and what it does and understanding what goes wrong when it's not working well is what cellular medicine is trying to approach. And then there's multiple components to that, which is, we can use a specific thing to signal the cell. So one of the main things that we know of is like, even in the context of bone marrow transplant. So that's a real cellular medicine where we take a bone marrow, we changes its polarity so that immune cells doesn't attack it. And then that combination with CRISPR technology can then be introduced into an individual to help with disease. So bone marrow transplant, CRISPR technology, we can use peptides, we can use different molecules to signal the cell. Stem cells is also considered cellular therapy because stem cells will go in and tell the rest of the cell to do certain things. So there's all of these other modalities that are considered cellular medicine to get to the place of solving health.
Awesome. I'm glad you brought up mitochondria because I think that'll connect some dots, especially like in the fitness industry and in physical therapy with movement. Like mitochondria has become a bit of a buzz term lately, and I think it for good reason. But whenever there's a buzz term, it can also be very much misinterpreted. But just
Yes.
to connect the dots when you hear like cellular, it's that the mitochondria is within the cell. So I think that's an important two dots to connect through there. So I know like from a physical movement standpoint, one of the things that's promoted with aerobic exercise is sort of your zone 2 training, your, steady state, long duration, just to get the slow twitch muscle fibers, the
Yeah.
endurance type 1 muscle fibers working a little bit more. There tends to be more mitochondria in those cells, as far as I understand. But that's definitely become something that I've heard with the last like 5 years or so. That's become a bigger and bigger thing that's been talked about. So, what from your standpoint, if somebody comes in and they don't necessarily have like a disease process, but they just wanted to, what can you do to optimize my mitochondria? Would you have a solid approach to that, or is it a little bit more complex than that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And as you said, mitochondria is what powers everything. We are all
Hmm.
energy making machines. So if you don't have mitochondria, you die. I mean, that's pretty
Right.
much what happens. So, um, and for somebody who is healthy, what actually keeps you healthy is the mitochondria. So one of the hallmarks of aging, why we age, why disease develop, why things are not working well, one of the biggest component of that is mitochondria dysfunction.
Hmm.
You need this generator that's supposed to keep you going. It has to power you. And that, think of the mitochondria as a generator. And I'll come back to your question so then people
Hmm.
can understand the mitochondria a little bit.
Hmm.
It's a generator and you have to put in fuel. And the fuel you put in is what's going to light it up and give you electricity.
Hmm.
But as part of getting the fuel into the mitochondria and creating electricity, you also create waste or fumes from that. Okay. And the whole idea is, first of all, let's talk about the fuel. So the fuel mitochondria have to use is your glucose, fatty acids, or potentially amino acids, right? The amino acid is the last source of energy you want to use. And as it turns out, the mitochondria or the generator actually prefers to use fatty acid as energy source, okay? Glucose is not a great energy source. Of course, glucose will give us some ATP, but actually fatty acid gives you a lot more energy. And it's a lot more cleaner, meaning when you use fatty acids as energy source, you actually decrease how much reactive oxygen species or waste is coming out of the system. So when you're doing zone 2 training, you're actually using fatty acids, which is actually a great thing to do to help you. One, first of all, you're going to lose weight because fat gets stored in that state. So it will help you lose weight, and it's also going to decrease how much reactive oxygen species or waste is coming out of the system. So we know that when you have all these generators that are working and they are overworking, meaning you put in a lot of energy. Anytime you have glucose, anytime you put in fuel, if you put in fuel in, it has to burn. Anytime you put fuel in there, it has to burn. So glucose keeps the system burning and creating a lot of waste. And eventually the mitochondria or the generator doesn't have the capacity to kind of recycle itself. Because think of it, the mitochondria or the generator has its own way of cleaning itself up. It needs a place when it's not working so hard so it can recycle itself. It can do autophagy or mitophagy. Mitophagy is the generator breaking down and then reassembling to be in a healthy way. So it's really, really important to kind of understand the signaling. So nutrition is a huge part of what or how we influence the mitochondria. Intermittent fasting, when you don't eat for a while, it actually allows the body not to use so much energy, because even when you're sleeping, you're using energy. The energy is always on, right? And then we also want to talk a little bit about reactive oxygen species. When you create these fumes that's coming out of the mitochondria, reactive oxygen species, not all of it is bad. In fact, that's actually a signaling molecule. It can tell the cell to do certain things. And that's why when you exercise, you actually put a little bit of stress on the mitochondria. And then from that reactive oxygen species, your body actually makes more mitochondria.
Right.
Oh, that's how you build, muscle strength. That's how you build endurance. But too much of it then creates problem. And the cells has the intelligence to really adapt in a way that enough of that stress. So a lot of the things that we're doing for longevity, people going into saunas, people doing all of these things, it's all, we call it hermetic principles, or what do we call it? Adversity mimetics. Right. Something that doesn't kill you actually makes you stronger. So a little bit of exposure, a little bit of stress on the mitochondria is a good thing, but too much of it is not bad. And beyond the energetics, mitochondria is involved in so many other things. Calcium, how we store calcium and how we use calcium. I'm moving my muscles. It's all calcium. That has to come from the mitochondria. Even how the cells develop itself, how the cell is dividing and making new ones, is a signal from the mitochondria. So there's all of these things that the mitochondria do. It also makes steroids. So all of our steroid hormones are actually made in the mitochondria. Your sex hormones, your estrogen, your progesterone, it's all the first part of taking cholesterol to progesterone to make progesterone to make testosterone or estrogen. It's all taking place in the mitochondria. So it's a very, very important part of our physiology or of our health. And somehow through evolution, you have the nucleus and the mitochondria coming together, and the nucleus does specific things, and the mitochondria does specific things. But the whole point in which you're stressing is we've come beyond this bioenergetics idea of mitochondria being just the generator. It does the generator, but it does way more other things. So we have to focus on, how do we signal the mitochondria in a healthy way? And a good way to do it is exercise, nutrition, sleep, all the things that we know how to, talk about. And things that can mess it up include toxins, junk food, alcohol. Alcohol is a toxin to the mitochondria, tobacco, smoking. So all of these other lifestyle things that are not great, they all end up affecting the cell by affecting the mitochondria.
Is there any specific like medications, peptides now that also promote more optimization from that perspective?
Yeah, so from a peptide standpoint, there's this peptide called SS31, and basically how mitochondria gets damaged. Mitochondria is like this. It has an inner membrane, and it's pushing ions through the inner membrane to make energy. You actually have this. Actually, there's actually a turbine, a machine in the mitochondria that's turning so fast, just like a machine. It's amazing how the body works, and it turns to create energy. And it has a membrane that protects it. So when it's making reactive oxygen species, the superoxide, there's all these other things that the body is making as a byproduct, and it needs to be able to get out of the cell safely. So when those reactive oxygen comes out, and there's too much of it, it can actually interact with the membrane of the mitochondria, and it can cause something called peroxidation. When that happens, then the mitochondrial membranes start breaking down. So there's peptides, something called SS31, that can actually block that process of peroxidation. There's specific peptides, MAT-C, that actually signal the mitochondria to make more mitochondria. And you can also signal or make more mitochondria through the things that we're talking about, which is exercise. So one of the best ways to make more mitochondria is exercising. And then obviously there's peptides and other things like that we can do. There is specific supplements that individuals can use. Everybody has heard of NAD. It's a way to improve the mitochondria, but it's actually a cofactor that the mitochondria needs to generate energy.
Perfect. Yeah, I know, like for that idea of like the sweet spot of stress, I think that is so important. Is just like, it's whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
Like, because there's definitely, like, I think there's a lot of folks that are basically, they're bathing in stress all the time, and that can absolutely have a damaging effect to the cell, as you alluded to. So it's like with exercise, I think that's what I find lately is I have to explain to people sort of the idea of being patient and also not trying to work as hard as possible, right? Because there's almost an addictive quality to that feeling that you get, right? That feeling of working really hard is like everything that I could have possibly done for health, I got all in one session. Well, it doesn't work that way. But sometimes you feel that way, like when you've put it, your sweat all over the mat, or you just like, you have like this really intense workout, like afterwards you feel like you've detoxed in a way, like and then there's all these hormones going through your body and make you feel good. But I think that it's similar to that kind of high you can get with a drug. And the problem with that is that it sort of makes the zone 2 stuff, or the stuff that you actually might have to rest a little bit longer, not as sexy. But this is, I think, where we find that sweet spot of stress, right? So zone 2, it's not easy work. It's just, it takes long, right? Sometimes it feels a little bit boring. And I think like the more you can kind of gamify it and use a heart rate monitor, you can have different ways that you're assessing your progress with that. I think it makes it a little bit more interesting. The other line of fitness that I've heard that can be quite useful, at least that it's discussed this way, is something called alactic training or anti-glycolytic training, where we're trying to basically skip the real hard phase of exercise So you
Yeah.
could be like, think your sprint phase, your creatine phosphagen system's usually like the first 10 to 15 seconds. So you can use like a kettlebell swing. You can use sprints, but you do really, really fast, powerful reps, but not to the point of exhaustion. Just so like, and not to the point of slowing down. So you might do like 5 reps of a kettlebell swing as hard as you can.
Hmm.
You put the weight down, you give yourself ample rest, and you keep repeating that. So the power system, the creatine phosphagen system, doesn't tend to produce acid in the
Lactic
body.
acid.
Like when
Yeah.
you get into glycolysis, which would be if you say did 30 seconds
Yeah.
of straight work. Now, like that's when it starts to suck. And there's value to that, but not necessarily for what we're talking about for optimizing mitochondria. So if we kind of skip that phase, but we do enough sets that we actually train our aerobic system where we're starting to use oxygen for energy, I think there's some research that creates a nice sweet spot of energy and stress that we're not working too hard. We can do enough bouts that we get the
Yeah.
aerobic benefit, but we're also tying into these fast twitch muscle fibers, which are really important for longevity in other ways. So those are like the two lines of training that I have in my head from what I can do from my scope of practice to try to optimize mitochondria right now. But I think there's a lot more research to be coming out there. I think the zone 2 is tried and true, and it's been studied a little bit better. But I do like that idea sometimes of in the strong first world, which
Hmm.
is where I got my kettlebell certification for. They do something called strong endurance, which they talk about that type of training where it's anti-glycolytic. We're trying not to
Yeah.
get into that glycolysis where there's a lot of acid building in the body, which can create more stress. But I think that's what a lot of group fitness promotes. It promotes that mid zone of
Hmm.
where we're not going super fast, we're not fully sprinting because we're going too long, so we have to slow down and pace ourselves, but we're also going a little too hard to be in that kind of zone 2 world. So we're bathing everybody in an acid bath, and the stress is sometimes a little bit too hard and too frequent to do that. Certainly, there's benefit in doing that occasionally, but if that becomes the way that we
No.
think
Yeah.
fitness is supposed to be, where I think we're actually doing some harm to our cellular health.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're talking about that because I was going to ask you about recovery because
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that it's also in the literature coming up is the need for recovery. People
Mm-hmm.
are just doing and doing and doing because I mean, when you do that, yes, you get to a point where you're depleting a lot of vitamins, you're getting rid of, you getting, people that work out a lot, they're depleted in glutamine.
Mm-hmm.
So you need that recovery to be able to kind of get the body to because everything is balanced. And
Mm-hmm.
as we talked about, so the body has this intelligence to adapt. So even sometimes, even though this is the signal that gets it to create health, if you do too much of it, it's just going to adapt in a way that's like, you know what, this is too much. So
Mm-hmm.
really, it's about getting to those moderations and then having recovery. And that's
Right.
also a function of aging.
Mm.
As we age, certain things change. How your body recover, how your body is repairing itself, it's a lot slower as we age. Why?
Mm-hmm.
It boils down to the mitochondria. Mitochondria is what's needed to even get your stem cells to come out. So you also have to become a little smarter. As we age, you can work smarter. And there's all this, the thing is like there's all this knowledge now, as you're talking about, that we can still target the cell in a way to get you the result you need without overdoing it. So working smarter is super, super important. And even when it comes to lactic acid, so lactic acid can even have other signal. It's, all of them are signaling molecules. So some level of it is actually good for the brain. It will create brain-derived neurotrophic factor and other things that goes on in the
Mm-hmm.
body. So there's all this other benefit adaptations that take place, but it's also important to quiet down the mitochondria or quiet down the generator. So then, the mitochondria can recycle itself and, you can continue to kind of health. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up recovery. I mean, like
Yes.
as far as like I know for recovery, like a lot of times I've come at recovery from trying to reduce people's pain as a therapist. Like
Yes.
people come in, that's their complaint, and like recovery has become another buzz term in fitness
Hmm.
because there's been such high intensity exercise that's been promoted that you really need the recovery piece or you can't keep doing the high intensity that you want to do.
Yeah.
But also a lot of the recovery stuff tends to look like therapeutic exercise that you'd find in a physical therapy clinic that might help to calm somebody's pain down. But I think that the thing that's like physiologically like really important to understand is that everything that somebody would want to do with high intensity, like they want to build muscle, they want to build fitness, the growth happens during the recovery. It doesn't
Mhm.
happen during the
Yes,
work, right? So
absolutely. Yep.
it's, the idea of anabolic or anabolic steroids, like that's steroids that allow you to grow. Like that's the growth time, where catabolic is sort of tearing you down. So
Yeah,
high intensity exercise is very catabolic,
absolutely. You take a
but
lot of
that's
cortisol and you're breaking things
exactly.
down. Yeah.
But that stress can then, if you're well recovered, then you can build back stronger. I mean, that's the general way to look at it. So we need the recovery, or we don't get what we were hoping to get out of the high intensity work, right? So
Absolutely.
even if we're doing the high intensity work well, where we're kind of not doing it every time we train, but we're using it appropriately without an appropriate recovery. So like if we get to the gym, but then we go and binge drink afterwards, or we just have a dress that or a job that just makes us so stressed that we are basically using exercise as a stress reliever, but we have no time to actually recover from the physical stress that we just put ourselves through in exercise. And I see this quite a bit, where
Yeah.
exercise is a different stress. It's a stress that again becomes like a drug that feels like a stress reliever, but it's almost like a punishment, because
Yeah.
it's a different feeling than the stress of a job or stress of not being able to sleep at night. So that there's this vicious cycle that happens where exercise is actually adding negatively to the stress response in some way. Although it feels better than the other stress that you're getting, it can get in the way of sleep. It can just enhance the cortisol response in the body.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the intention, if the intention is to lose weight or the intention is to build muscle, it's getting in the way of that, because as we know, like cortisol will slow the metabolism down. It holds on to fat stores,
Catabolic. Yeah.
and you see that. Yeah, I see that quite a bit, especially with certain populations as they get a bit older, and they still have a very busy job. Is that they're killing it in life? Like they're usually very type A. They're killing it in life, but they're really struggling, and it has nothing to do with laziness. It's almost the exact opposite. It's just they can't figure out a way to do enough. And ultimately, it becomes you have to figure out a way to recover better, to rest better. And that's not easy for people. And I
Yes.
think I underestimated that until I started having more people for longer periods of time that are very, very like high level folks. But the struggle to recover is a real struggle.
Yeah, and the recovery, you kind of mentioned on it, and a huge part of that recovery, how the body is recycling itself and making growth hormones and resetting the whole system is sleep. So,
Mm,
so if we don't get sleep to be aligned very well, we don't do well, because when you sleep, that's when actually the body is making all this antioxidants that your body is going to need. You need NADPH, which is the
mm,
master antioxidants to help the mitochondria to recover during the day. It has to reset the clocks. It has to reset the hormones. So there's all of these things. It's not just one thing. So it's really important for people to understand that one particular thing that you do as a way to kind of solve health is not going to get you there, right? Because there's people, like you mentioned, people who are like, they're exercising maybe. And then the other part of that recovery is nutrition, right? Protein.
mm,
But if people are exercising, they're eating well, and they're not sleeping well, you're not going to get there.
right.
Um, if you're doing all of those things and you're still stressing and you have high cortisol, stress
Mm,
that's not healthy, right? Specific amount of stress is healthy, but above physiologic stress, where there's so much cortisol in the system, is catabolic. It affects the immune cells. And then you have to, and the immune cells also requires energy. The immune cells is dying, then your body needs more energy to kind of take care of things. So it's really, really important to really get back to the whole system, looking at the whole system holistically. And how do we, even when we give that signal to get to health, a cellular medicine approach? Yeah, exercise is a cellular medicine approach. You do that, but then you have to understand hormones, you have to understand sleep, you have to understand nutrition, and put all of that in the right stacking order to get to a place where the cell will do the right thing for you. So that's important that you're talking about the recovery. Yes.
absolutely. So this will be a question that I've gotten off, and I'll ask it to you, almost kind of understanding what your answer is.
Yeah.
But so you mentioned a bunch of different parts of the cell. That is there a certain supplementation process that could do what sleep does for you, that what exercise does for you, what nutrition does for you, so that it's easier for folks? Or is it just like it needs to be part of a holistic plan?
So it has to be part of a holistic plan. We have specific molecules that are actually like exercise mimetics. We have things that
Hmm.
mimic because at the cellular level, they are kind of converging on the same pathways. So for example, if you take like metformin is an exercise mimetic. It works on AMPK.
Hmm.
There's sensing pathways. The same thing happens when you're exercising. But the issue is that when you take a drug that goes in, which is a small molecule, metformin is something that your body doesn't make. Yeah, it
Hmm.
will activate that system, but it's using certain cofactors in your body. It depletes your B vitamins. Okay,
Hmm.
so even though we have drugs that can mimic some of those things, there is still at this point we still need the actual activation of the system through physical activity, specific stress, to really get the cell to adapt in a healthy way. And I can give you an example of that where the signaling in the cell. Yes, people that have diabetes, they can take insulin, right? So I had a patient who asked me this question, and he said, "I've been taking my insulin. I've been keeping my A1C down. I've been taking my insulin. My sugars are down. Why is it that I'm still have retinopathy? Why is it that I still have neuropathy, right? So even though they're signaling in the body with insulin, they are still eating, they eat whatever they want. And then they,
Right.
they put insulin and thinking insulin is going to regulate the cell, right? But no, the cell is smarter. You have to limit how much nutrients you put in for the cell to recycle itself.
Right.
So even though you put in this, signal in to regulate blood sugar, it's actually storing the sugar and making you fat. Insulin is a storing, insulin will
Right.
make you gain weight. So he's gaining weight. So insulin alone or the drug alone is not going to do it. You have to also do exercise and you have to work on metabolism.
Hmm.
Metabolism, what you
Hmm.
put it in and what you do with it, right?
Right.
So if you put it in and you just don't do anything with it, you don't use it to burn, you don't put it in the generator to do it, and you're taking exogenous insulin, it's still not going to get you to health. So it's
Hmm.
really, really important for people to understand. And especially this is common kind of like in the biohacking space,
Hmm.
where people just kind of like, oh, this is it. I mean, you have to do all of it well.
Right.
And not one signal alone is going to solve it. There's hormones. Even within one cell, there's 100,000 chemical reactions. So you can hack a cell. I mean, we kind of use that as a way to kind of make us feel good. But physiologically or at the molecular level, you have to do everything well. And it's not even so much of our control. The cells just have this intelligence to kind of
Hmm.
develop this, right? From one cell. Here
Right.
I am with all these things. It has its own programming, and I'm here talking, and it has
Hmm.
all this programming. And if something goes wrong, I have a stroke, some part of it gone, I can't speak anymore. So
Hmm.
there's all this intelligence in the cells that we have to respect. And then also getting individuals to understand that rest is super important. Recovery is very important. And we have to put all of that together to get to a place where the body or the cell will make the right decision.
I think that's an interesting point about the A1C, and I'm familiar with that relationship between insulin being something that can actually kind of control blood sugar, but at the same time, it's sort of like the opposite of what a type 2 diabetic would need in the
Yeah.
long run, and that it would actually hold on to more fat. But the fact that it would actually kind of normalize A1C, which is oftentimes like the gold standard for what someone would be to be considered type 2
Yeah.
diabetic, but like no other numbers may change for the better, right? Like how much we may put too much stock in any one biomarker and how we have to basically appreciate like what a biomarker is, what it isn't. But I think
Yeah.
a lot of times when we start to throw diagnoses out there, we have to have like an individual biomarker to say like this means that you have this disease and it's not more complex than that, or that there's not more of a holistic approach to it. So I think that that's a good example there
Yeah.
because diabetes is so prevalent, but it becomes like it's more than the diabetes, right? Like it's the metabolic
Well, like to
condition that we have to
function.
take. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
Exactly. And it's also, these medicines don't change the phenotype of the disease. Okay.
Right.
Somebody who has, diabetes and you're taking insulin and they're still eating junk, they're not exercising, the outcomes are bad. And actually, that's
Hmm.
kind of the case in medicine. Even like some of these medicines that we have that helps with diabetes and helps with weight loss, with, semaglutide, some of these things that are out there now, people get it and they just take it without changing any of their habits.
Hmm.
So we are not changing the phenotype. And
Hmm.
to change the phenotype, you have to signal the cell in the right way. The cell has capacity. Beta cells, pancreatic cells, the beta cells in the pancreas has capacity to start making insulin again. You just
Hmm.
have to give it the right signal. It just cannot be just taking insulin or taking a specific drug to solve the problem. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say conversely, like, and I'm sure your experience, you would have more of this than me, but like, I've just noticed like certain medicines, like we're neither of us are saying that medicine is not a way to go. It's just, it can't be alone, right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times medicine becomes a nice starting point for people that are struggling with behaviors, right? But if left alone and that you just feel like that's the thing I'm going to do, I'm only going to do medicine, it's probably not doing what you're hoping it's going to do, right?
It never does. And
But
because a
it,
lot of the medicines we have, small molecules, they're
right,
basically just blocking one of the pathway. They're just
right.
blocking a pain signal. For example, being a pain doctor. When
Hmm.
I'm giving you certain medicine, if I give you gabapentin, I'm just blocking sodium channels. I'm not
Right.
doing anything to change what's affecting your nerves. So really, yes, that's a great point, and a lot of traditional medicine, and that's why we have this idea of cellular medicine, where we're actually
Hmm.
trying to get to the root cause.
Right.
What is going on at the cellular level that's causing this problem? Why do you
Hmm.
have a neuropathy? Well, yeah, because maybe you don't have enough B vitamins, or maybe there's damages to the myelin. What's causing that? A specific
Hmm.
toxin, a specific activity, alcohol is
Hmm.
doing that. Your body is not making enough. You don't have enough specific minerals to heal. So really, cellular medicine is where we actually try to go and change what is going on at the cellular level, and it's a function of changing habits.
Right.
And whereas the things you're talking about, where traditional medicine we're just blocking pain signals, but really not stopping any of the actual problem that's driving whatever pathology people are dealing with.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think like the supplement, pharmaceutical industry is, I think it's a continuum even with behavior, right? Like, so
Absolutely.
if we kind of look at it from that perspective of, does it make it easier to do the lifestyle things that would be good for you anyway? If it does, then it's great for you. And I'm sure you've seen that a ton where, you know, medicine, supplementation just gets people to start going down a more positive cycle.
Yeah.
But it can't be left alone. And I think sometimes what I've been hearing a lot lately is almost the opposite, where people are so anti-medicine, and that's a mistake too.
Yeah.
And I think it become to the point where we're not appreciating that we don't need to pick a team.
Yeah.
It's everything. It can be very well integrated, but and there's just going to be some people that like do medicine because they just really don't want to do the behavioral stuff, and we can't judge that. It's just not going to be as effective, right? And vice versa. But like I'm seeing a lot more confusion of late
Yeah.
about I'm going to try to do everything without medicine, and to the detriment of health and longevity, right? Like there's a reason that we have these things,
Yeah.
but things need to, I think, be well integrated. And the more that we're, I think, open to both sides, it becomes obvious that that's true. It's like it, but then if you become very polarized with it, it's like politics. We feel like it has to be one team or the other, as opposed to, maybe there's a little bit
Integrating.
of good on
Yeah.
both sides. Yeah.
Yes, I'm glad that you bring that up because, there's a place for pharmacotherapy
Hmm.
because again, at the cellular level, we're trying to signal the cell, okay? And there is a place for drugs, there's a place for supplements, there's a place for natural things, there's a place for peptides, there's a place for all of these things are converging on the cell.
Hmm.
And a lot of times, like you said, certain habits, it's hard. I mean, if you live in an environment where you're exposed to certain toxins and you develop a disease, you may need to take a drug. And the other thing that I think is also important to kind of bring out is like, people have this idea of natural being safe, right?
Right,
They
right,
would do supplement, they would do a certain diet, they will go through a certain process and think that is safe because it's not a drug. When it gets to your cell doesn't distinguish what is, all of it converge on the cell and it does something to the cell. The
right.
cell, all of it is signaling an information. Okay. And the other thing that we also have to recognize that one, we already established that natural does not mean it's safe. And what is safe for somebody may not be safe for you. So definitely there's a place for all of these things and it takes guidance. And yes, if somebody comes to me right now and they're in severe pain, if I don't give them something to take away their pain or block their pain signal, I can't talk to them about nutrition. They're not going to listen to me. You're not
Right.
solving my problem, right? So it's really trying to get to a place where we can get people help. There's things that we can do for the short term and saying, okay, this is what we're using this for. but we also have to work on these other things. And then the
Mhm.
other thing that I will also hope that, if there's other healthcare providers that are listening to this, will pay attention to is, we have this in society, we have this knowledge bias where we
Mhm.
feel like we know everything, right? Everybody
Right.
have a cell phone. How many people know how a cell phone works?
Right.
90% of
Right.
the people have no idea. So we
Yeah.
are in this environment where we are so connected and people hear things. So if somebody is not prescribing a medication and they sit around and they go, this medicine is not good for you, you don't know. Okay.
Mhm.
And even as a clinician, there is, when we learn about evidence, and then there is what really happened in practice. Somebody in front of me, I have to use the drug. There's a place for them. Even when drugs have side effects, there's a way for us to use it. So it's really important for us to really, if you're not in that space where you understand what really goes on, to kind of step back and say, hey, maybe ask your doctor why you should not take this drug. Because
Right.
people come in and go, somebody told me not to take this because it does this.
Yeah.
Do they even know how it works? They don't.
Right.
They've never prescribed it. They've never seen it. They've heard somebody talk about it on, a podcast or whatever. So it's really for us to check in with this knowledge bias and then also recognize that all the things that we're doing have a place. The
Yeah.
acupuncture have a place. The chiropractor has a place. Physical therapy has nutrition, medicine, right? All of them has a place, and we have to recognize when do certain things have to take place to help people optimize. And then it's also individualized. We have to
Absolutely.
respect, we're in this space of caring for people. And it's not just what I believe or what I want, right? It's the person in front of you, what type of resources, what type of, agency they have to even make sense of the information that's you're giving to them.
Yeah.
So I like this idea of you bringing in and getting people to understand that there's a place for all of this.
Yes.
And pharmacology is great. It's signaling the cell, but we have to also go beyond that to get people to change their habits. Because if you're taking a drug to help you with something and you keep, it doesn't work.
Absolutely.
I've had patients who actually were like, they're not sleeping. They like, they've had all this problem. They're not sleeping. They've seen sleep doctors. And then I'm just talking to them. I say, like, do you drink before you go to sleep? They were like, yeah, I drink a glass of wine. Right. But the patient doesn't know that, yes, alcohol is sedative, but the metabolites is stimulating.
Yeah.
So their problem why they're not sleeping is because they're drinking alcohol before they go to bed.
Yeah.
So it's just education, and the patient doesn't need for me to put them on a sleep medication. But if there's somebody who has something else and we need to reset their circadian rhythm, yes, we can use medications to get them there. But again, trying to understand what is going on at the cellular level. Why are they not sleeping? Is it a function of melatonin? Is it a function of stress? Is it a function of activation of the sympathetic system? So we have to connect all of those things and try to figure out how do we signal the cell? It could be through meditation. It could be through exercise. It could be through nutrition and other things that helps people to or get the cells to get in a state of homeostasis. It's all balance. Yeah.
I think you mentioned this. You use this line: "You can't manage what you don't measure." And I
Yes.
think when it comes to sleep, that is, I think, one of the number one things. Because if you really think about sleep, and this isn't intuitive necessarily, but
Mm.
if you have no idea how you slept, right?
Yeah.
Because the only thing you remember is when you weren't sleeping, right? So you might remember being up more frequently, but
Yeah.
like you only remember when you wake up, right? So having some type of monitoring for your sleep is so vital, right? Like, because you really can't go based on intuition of just like, I felt like I slept okay, right? Because there's so many things that get in the way of that. And again, we were talking about the difference between sedation and sleep. Like, sleep is a very active process. And we
Yeah.
should probably do another whole episode. I think that would be a good thing to
Yes.
do
That would be
on
great. No
sleep.
sleep. Yeah.
But just the idea of measuring and being able to measure more things, I think becomes a very valuable thing. And that's what like I'm excited about as a healthcare practitioner, is just technology making more things measurable, and like so you can get more feedback in somewhat real time, because I do think that that helps move the needle behaviorally for people when it almost becomes a little bit of a game. And we know, like, one thing we don't have a problem in society is playing games, like, right, video
Yes.
games, and having two children is just like that. That's the world. The world is
Yeah.
virtual, and it's certainly, I don't have to talk anyone into playing games. But if you can gamify health somewhat, and I think part of gamifying anything is to have certain metrics that you're seeing improve over time. But I think we can't just wait every 6 months till we go to the doctor, because those metrics become meaningless. And in some ways, like they become meaningless to the individual, and like they just they probably don't even compare it to what they had last time. But I don't know how dynamic to change they are either, right? So like being able to measure your blood pressure every day is a very different process for changing your behavior than getting your blood pressure measured
In
every
the
six
doctor's office.
months. Yeah,
Yeah.
like how useful is
Yeah.
that? And a lot
Yeah.
of decisions are still made on that, right? Like a once a 2 times a year blood pressure measure that you get when you go to your physician, like decisions are made on that for,
The rest of the year.
medication and
Yeah.
stuff like that, right? So like appreciating like how dynamic of a number that is, and sleep is that way. Like once you start to see it and you measure it, like you now will change your behavior naturally. And that, I mean, that's been well documented within, nutrition research, where just monitoring, not even attempting to change
Yeah.
anything, you just
Yeah.
monitor things, you will eat less. If that is what you need to do, you will certainly change the way you eat just by monitoring it. So I think like that's what I get excited about, in this realm. And it'd be nice if we could see our mitochondria change in the moment. That would be cool. Like if we could kind of get technology like that. But
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
not
we can
as
take pictures of the mitochondria, but in a lab, unless, we
right.
take you out and, so, but
So when the
yes.
lab becomes a wearable, that's when I
Yeah.
think it's going
Oh,
to be a game changer.
and that's not far off. It's
Right.
very close. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything that you can think of on this topic that like you're looking in the future, you're really excited about?
Yeah, so I mean, I think cellular medicine, encompasses all the things I've talked about, like
Mm,
CRISPR technology, where we can
mm,
edit genes to really solve the problem of what's going on at the cellular level, what type of genes are being transcribed, and what type of proteins are being made, um, and stem cells, AI, and even bioelectronic medicines, how we can use a specific bioelectronics stimulating. There's even a device now that helps with modulating. It's called the inflammatory reflex. I just learned about it recently.
mm.
Within the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve has this inflammatory reflex that people that have refractory exposure, refractory to like biologics,
Hmm.
they can put this device on the vagus nerve that can regulate immune activity.
Interesting.
There's tons of wearables and devices, and neuromodulation for migraines and all of these things. So I think that whole CRISPR technology, that whole 3D printing, now we're able to print body parts and cellular parts. So all of that is quite fascinating. And looking forward to all of that. And then one of the things that we also kind of have to fundamentally talk about is like, I think you asked about how do you implement even cellular medicine, is
Hmm.
that how you apply this type of medicine, it has to be in an environment where the cells can signal and do what they're supposed to do. So, for example, people do stem cells. If you get umbilical stem cells, you can't do that here in the US. But if you go outside of the country, you want to put stem cells in an environment where there's not a lot of inflammation.
Hmm.
Okay, so we have to remove the toxins that are taking place there. We have to optimize the environment, whether through nutrition, whether through whatever supplementation, all of that has to be there. And then we also have to change habits, right?
Hmm.
So same, specific habits got to people where they are, or specific exposures. If you live certain areas, sometimes you don't control some of these things, right? So really trying to figure out how we can create the epigenome environment where things actually will work well is a good way to implement this type of therapies. But super excited. AI is blowing up, and then we're figuring things out. There is Yamanaki cells or factors that you can change a few genes in the body to reverse aging. Because part of all of this problem that we're talking about, the underlying reason why all of this happens, or it's because we age. When you're young, as most young people know, it's easy. You bounce
Yeah.
back. You can go and
Right.
drink all night and go take the exam the next day, and you're good to go, right? Your mitochondria is like, yeah, we'll make more mitochondria. We got more signaling from the brain, and we have more stem cells to replete that. So we can definitely get there once this technology becomes available, and then it becomes a function of how easy this becomes to integrate into healthcare delivery, right?
Right.
Because some of these things exist, but is insurance going to pay for it? Who can afford it?
Right.
So those are all questions that need to be answered. And even when it comes to gene editing, some ethical issues that has to be addressed. But it's exciting, and there are solutions. But fundamentally, do the nutrition well, do the sleep well, do the exercise well, manage the stress, have fun. And then once you have those things, then everything you add on top of it, cellular
Works
medicine,
better.
whatever
Yeah.
it is,
Yeah.
works a lot better. Yeah.
So there's no way around that for folks. You
No,
gotta do the
there's a lot
behaviors.
of mimetics. There's fasting mimetics.
Yeah.
There is, exercise mimetics. There's all of
Hmm.
this mimetics that we have, but they have not shown to really like make a huge change. You still
Right.
have to do the actual activity. So
All right.
until we get there, you still have to do it for now.
So I'm not going to be out of a job anytime soon. So.
No, no, no. We're gonna need you. We're gonna need you. Absolutely. Especially pain. Pain is not going anywhere.
Right. Right.
Yes.
All right.
Wonderful.
I think we covered a lot there, and I think you mentioned AI. I want to. We'll talk a little bit more about it. I think that'd be a good thing to have
Yeah.
a whole other episode on. Just some of these things that are kind of up the pipeline that we, that just sounds new, and I think to understand like what can they do from a healthcare perspective. I think a lot of people hear AI now and they just think of like the Chat GPT or something like that. But yeah,
Yeah,
there's so
no,
much that can be done with that, and like
absolutely.
how that's gonna help healthcare down the line. So we'll save that for another episode.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I think this was great. Look forward. Maybe we'll do this in about another couple weeks or so, and we'll talk about some other things that you offer. I know peptides is a big one, and we'll look at anti-aging. I think that's going to be a
Yeah.
nice discussion, anti-aging and longevity from your perspective. So,
Wonderful. Thanks so much for this and looking forward to educating people about all of these things. And they are possible. I mean, yeah, we
uh,
can get to health. Awesome.
absolutely. Love hearing you talk about it. We'll see you next time.
Yes. Thank you.